Welcome back, sci-fi fans. It's Andrew from the Science Fictionary Podcast. I'm here tonight with Nick and
Hey
Tabitha.
everyone.
Thank y'all for joining me tonight.
My pleasure.
Yeah, always
Glad to
nice to
have you
talk about
here, and I'm looking forward. Like, this is one of those. Stargate is one of those shows. It's so big. People don't really, if you weren't really into it when it was on, you might not realize just how big of a deal Stargate was. It is easily, when you talk about science fiction TV, it is one of the. There are more episodes of Stargate than nearly any other science fiction series, with only a couple of giants really having anything bigger like Doctor Who. And kind of as we get going, just for perspective, I wanted to throw this out there. Stargate. Now this is across 3 series, but Stargate has 354 episodes of television,
Wow.
with the biggest being SG1 at 214, which puts it bigger than any season of any Star Trek series. The biggest Star Trek series is sitting at like 178. I think that's the Next Generation. The only things that are even close, I mean, you've got Doctor Who, obviously, with nearly 900 episodes. And Twilight Zone's up there at 284. Supernatural's one that's really been climbing the charts, and you know, it's at 327 now, so it's closing the gap quickly. But when you talk about really, really prevalent science fiction series, this is one of the big ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think when
Underappreciated,
I think when you're putting all 3 shows together,
hang the ones that even come close, it's probably less than 10 that are in that same bracket as Stargate.
Yeah, it's very few. I mean, Star Trek, obviously, if you put everything together, is at nearly 700. The Twilight Zone, if you put everything Twilight Zone has done together, it's at almost 300. So there are some big ones, but what is it that y'all think it is about Stargate that gave it such staying power?
originality. I would say for me, I'm kind of new to the Stargate world. Like, honestly, I've been watching it faithfully, if you will, for probably 2 years now. And I just keep restarting SG1. I actually started with Atlantis and then kind of went back and watched SG1. And I remember when it came out when I was younger and I wasn't really into it. So now I'm a huge fan. And I think for me, because I'm also a history buff, something that keeps it substantial is that it is kind of grounded with some reality as to our history
Yes.
here on Earth. And so it's somewhat relatable, whereas Star Trek, you know, like it's supposed to be in the future of Earth.
Right.
So it's absolute, you know, almost an absolute science fiction as far as that's concerned, because we don't know what's going to happen in the future. Whereas Stargate's kind of like all in the past. And
Right.
I've never watched. Well, I've only watched like 2 episodes of Doctor Who. I honestly couldn't really get into it. It was a little bit too off and strange for me, so I can't really compare it with Doctor Who. I tried, I really did, but I think for me, that's what keeps it kind of grounded for a lot of people. It's not so far out there that but it's still original in that there's new elements to it. At least that's what I would say for me.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick, Christian Fandom Geek, thank you for joining us tonight. If you want to jump in and talk some Stargate, just hit me up on Twitter and I'll get you in here. Nick, what about you? Because, I mean, obviously, you're a fan of a lot of the older sci-fi, and you're a fan of the one, you know, the really the giant in the room that it sounds like neither me or Tabitha ever really got into, which is Doctor Who. You know, Marisha's our Doctor Who fan, and
when I look at it, Doctor Who is something I got into later, but Stargate is probably part of what prepped me for Doctor Who, because I really got into the whole mythology mixing with aliens, and Doctor Who plays into it a lot of that. Like Doctor Who, they go back in time and there's werewolves or there's vampires or that, but it's always actually aliens invading Earth. It's never mythological. It's these things, and the Stargate kind of played to that same palette. Of
Right.
course, Doctor Who can be a lot more corny, a lot more whimsical, and nonsensical, whereas Stargate
Yeah.
does a lot of more techno babble and that kind of stuff. And I am a hard sci-fi, like a Star Trek fan, which I think Stargate mixes a lot with that. But something that I think that I've recently been going through for the first time watching classic Battlestar Galactica,
Okay.
and I've seen a lot of inspiration. Like when I look at the ships that Earth eventually builds, they remind me of the Galactica.
They do.
And I look at just some of the different technologies and the way they go about things, and it has a lot of that, especially the way they handle humor.
Right. Yeah, Stargate did a lot of interesting things. Of course, the ships came later, and some people like when they added the ships, and some people don't, because some people kind of felt like when it was Stargate pre-ships, it was kind of like, this is our Earth, this is our world that we live in, and this is happening somewhere. And then suddenly you have ships, and you go, okay, well now it's a little more Star Trek.
Yeah.
I can see
So,
that.
so I know some people don't like that. I love it. I love the ships, and you're right. And I think some of that is that I think the Galactica. I think the ships from Space Above and Beyond, if you're familiar with that series, and then Stargate. They're all sort of based on very earthbound concepts, like aircraft carriers.
Did I freeze or did Andrew freeze?
I think you froze, Nick.
Okay.
Technology's only great when it works.
Right. So recently we kind of got the news, and we knew that Stargate ultimately went off the air. There was some problems within the fandom that didn't help, but ultimately we lost Stargate because MGM went bankrupt. It wasn't, a lot of people blame Stargate Universe. Before we go any further, how did y'all feel about Stargate Universe? Did y'all watch that one?
I only watched, I think, one episode, honestly, and I wasn't like there was some intrigue there, but there was some stuff in it that I personally just don't necessarily enjoy watching. I think they started introducing, for me, my personal taste, a little bit too graphic of sexual things in there. And that
Yeah.
was a strange way to open the show. I found that to be, I know it's a mature thing, but I found it to be a childish play because it was almost like, what can we throw into the first episode to hook people or make it feel like it's grander or better or darker or something? I'm not sure. And that really threw me off because I understand that there is some sensuality in the other season or series, but
But not
this
like
was
that. This was different.
yeah, this was so far beyond that it really just was like it took away that simplistic magic that I believe that the shows had. And so it just totally I probably will eventually watch it just because I kind of want to know the rest of the story. The storyline for the first episode intrigued me, like why were they all there? How did they get there? What happened? But after that, I
Right.
just couldn't. I was like, if this is the way that they're going to do this for the rest of the series, then it's already lost me because I didn't come here for that. I came here for good storytelling. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I really think that was their play to be the next Battlestar Galactica. I think after the Battlestar Galactica reboot did a lot of that, got very edgy, that for some reason they decided we need to make a Stargate that mirrors that, which was
Yeah.
odd because if you've watched Stargate, the SG-1, the original, then you know that the first episode had nudity in it.
right.
And I don't know if have you ever watched the director's cut of the Children of the Gods episode?
No, but I did
There's
hear
that-
that there
They
were
took it
3
out.
different versions of it.
What's that, Nick?
Yeah, there's 3 different versions, and they've taken that out of
They did.
any version after. Brad White, the showrunner, was very much against. When it came to Universe, one thing that I didn't catch completely at the beginning, which soured me, is I didn't catch that these weren't those people that were supposed to go on the mission.
Right.
These were just the people manning the base. But one of the things that I compared it to is you look at Atlantis. And when Atlantis goes through, these are supposed to be some of the best representing all these countries. And now they have a similar mission, similar to Atlantis. And like the moment they get on the other side of that gate, they're at each other's throat.
Right.
And that just that didn't feel very much. But after I got a chance to listen to a lot of podcasts, whether it be through Dial the Gate, Gate World, or Brad Wright's new podcast, talking about what they had planned, because they went into that with a 5-year plan, and they got cut off right after they got through all their setup of what they were going to do. And I think the show would have garnered more fans and more respect from the fans afterwards. But between that and the sourness of having Atlantis canceled at the same time,
Yes.
I think is what really made the ratings on that show drop.
I think so too. And like I was saying, there was that nudity in the first episode, and because I don't know if you're aware that Stargate started off on Showtime.
Yeah.
I heard about that. Yeah.
And so, that was the place for edgy content back in the day. So they were going to be edgy, and they did the nudity and pretty quickly went, you know what, that's not our audience.
Right.
And so, and they learned the lesson. They never did it again. And until, 13 years later, when they try to launch Universe, and they just jumped completely into it. Now, it did get better. Universe got better. The second season is actually very enjoyable. I did use Universe to get one of my friends that had never watched Stargate into it. But when he watched the first season, he called it Jerks in Space. And then but by the end of the second season, he was really upset when it got canceled. And so it did get better, and it started to feel a little more like Stargate. But I
you've
think
already ostracized a whole group of people.
you did, between the cutting Atlantis off at the knees, and that first episode of Universe, you lost so many people, and the ratings never came back.
It was like they were trying to gain a new audience and just anticipated and maybe took for granted that the old audience would stay with them. But it's like, if you've got your loyal group of people, don't try to throw them to the side to get new people. I mean, I understand it's a business thing, but
Right.
still, with me, I think people are learning more and more with fandoms. You got to be very careful when you introduce new ideas, new techniques, tactics, storylines, and stuff. As we all have seen with Star Wars, how much division there is with that when they try to do new things. And I
Yeah.
think that's kind of what happened with Stargate.
Yeah. I've got one more Red Fiver I'm going to bring in real quick. We've got Amanda is joining us.
Hey there,
What's
guys.
going on?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
Welcome. So just real quick, I'll give you a chance to jump in and kind of tell us a little bit about, how you got into Stargate, when you kind of got into it, and did you watch all of the shows or?
I actually got into SG1 in middle school. So I
Okay.
was a bit later in. I think SG1 was on either season 4 or 5 by that time. And that's when I caught into SG1 via reruns, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And then I caught up and got up to season. And then I watched Stargate Atlantis all the way through. So
Okay.
the only Stargate show I didn't watch was Universe. And that was because it was so different from what I was used to.
Yep.
And I never even watched it. I watched, I think the premiere of Universe, and I was just like, no, this is not Stargate.
That's what we all just.
Yeah.
Right. So it was really kind of a perfect storm that really killed Stargate.
Yeah.
The fans abandoned Universe. They wanted Atlantis back, and so many people. I mean, there were huge movements within the community to not watch anything till they brought Atlantis back.
Yeah.
And so you had that going on, and then MGM got into serious financial trouble, and they've basically been trying to sell the studio for the last at least 10 years. So kind of going around the room, and we kind of got into this, but not exactly. What was it about, especially with Stargate? Because when Atlantis ended, it was still going very, very strong. The ratings were still very strong. There was still a really big fandom. I mean, there still is. I mean, you go to places like Dragon Con, and there's enormous showings of Stargate fans. But what is it? What's the magic of those first 15 seasons of Stargate that gave it such staying power? Tabitha?
Oh, I thought you were directing.
Oh no, I'm just going to go around the room. Whoever wants to jump in. But if nobody jumps in, I'll Oh.
Because I thought we had kind of talked about that.
We
like,
kind of did. Actually, I kind of wanted to hear what Nick had to say about this. And Nick, are
Yeah.
you there? Are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you
Okay.
hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Your video's not working
Frozen,
well, but
yeah.
I can hear you just
Oh, okay.
fine.
Yeah, so for me, I look at with Stargate, it's got the family personal bonds like Star Trek has, between the characters. I would say to some extent even more than when you have that core group going through the gate.
Yeah.
And there's also the moral questions, because sometimes what seems right at the moment doesn't end up being right, and having the characters deal with that, go through that, and then just the exciting world and the mixing in mythology with that, so that you can have people who don't like sci-fi, but maybe they're into fantasy,
Right.
and you're mixing in that fantasy mythology there, but you've also got the Star Trek techno babble, but you've also got a military kind of, if you're more into action. So it's kind of just that blend of all those coming together that makes the show that I think a lot of people who aren't generally sci-fi fans even like this show.
Yeah.
Good point.
But it's one of those. It's as far as what they call military sci-fi. It is the big, the big series. It's the big franchise out there.
Yep.
That's why when you go to, like I said, you go to Dragon Con and you go, they have a whole track. You can spend the whole weekend at Dragon Con doing nothing but military sci-fi stuff. And Stargate makes up an enormous portion of that. And I think you're right, Nick. I think a lot like Star Trek, it's the very human story. It's that you can relate to the characters, and it does. It's definitely using the same kind of motif as Star Trek and playing on the moral stories and
Gray areas.
the gray areas and those things. Trek did that. Trek, Stargate, Sliders did a lot of that. In fact, some of them have actually told the same story, from different points of view across those three series. But what about you, Amanda? Do you have anything else to add on what gave Stargate its staying power?
Yeah, I think really the dynamic of the cast, the starting cast, like that family background, even in the later seasons when Richard Dean Anderson left, to me, it still was pushing right through forward. Ben Browder and Claudia Black came in and they just kind of melded right into the family, and it was that perfect dynamic still there. So I think for that is what made it staying, just those core characters and how they interacted with each other.
Right. Richard Dean Anderson is one of those guys that has never gotten his real dues as an actor. I mean, two of the biggest, with MacGyver and Stargate, two huge series that are still loved today. But, people don't talk about him, but bringing him in was absolutely brilliant when they started this show. Because everybody else, it really was. But everybody else.
Like, what?
Right. But I think it was good because I think that, Jack O'Neill in the movie is a great character, but he is that absolutely rigid military guy.
Yeah.
And I think that someone like Richard Dean Anderson was able to come in and keep kind of being that character, but make the character more lovable as well.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah. How could
One
you
of
not
the
like
things, one of the things that Richard Dean Anderson did, there's an episode in the first season that he pitched, and of course he didn't write it, but he pitched it. And it was part of his willingness to come on and do the show. And that was the episode about the crystalline thing that morphs into his son
Yeah.
at the end. And it was, he watched the movie and he said, I can't play that in a regular series. Like that's not me. He says, but I will try to do my best to play that. But we have to have an episode that I confront that. The death of my son in the first season where I can get over it and then I can move on and become my Jack.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, the character definitely evolves as they. And it was a good transition from the movie character
Yeah.
to what Jack O'Neill becomes, which is, one of the greatest leading men in the history of science fiction television. Here's my co-host here, my regular co-host wants to know if Stargate's the one with James Spader and Egyptian god Anubis. Yes, David. We're gonna have to watch this if you haven't watched it.
It's a great movie.
Yeah,
But-
that's when what is it? Ultron and Ego blew up Raw.
Right? Yep.
The part of mythology in Stargate, I think, is a great part and what really brought all of us into the fandom as well. Like, I was always a big history lover. So when I was that young kid in middle school, like, I loved mythology. And so all that ancient Egyptian and Greek and, Canaanite mythology being brought in was just such a cool little story piece to bring into.
Yeah, it's one of the things that makes it interesting. It's one of the things that sets it apart from the other big science fiction series like Trek is that you are going to new worlds, but
Yeah.
that new world is a reflection of your own history.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, I mean, they brought in a lot of stuff, with bringing in the Norse mythology and,
Like-
basically having had the aliens that have come to Earth have, representing the old gods,
They
which
did it
is
so brilliantly. Like they
Yeah.
really made that just seamless. Like if unless you believe in aliens and all that kind of stuff, but it made sense. Like
right.
It really did,
Yeah.
yeah. It really did make
made
sense.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So before we
Yeah,
talk
that's,
about,
that's probably my favorite part of it, and I think my other, my favorite character, at least from SG1, is Daniel Jackson. And
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. Daniel
because of the
Jackson
way
hands down.
he's just, like the Torment of Tantalus when he's there and he's seeing all the races, the meaning of life stuff, and like he just loses himself in that, and that gives you a gateway, a character to lose yourself in the show.
right. Well, and of course, the other characters are all great, but it's the balance between Jack and Daniel
Yeah.
that makes the show, because they're the two primary viewpoints usually when you're venturing into those gray areas. They're the ones sitting on each side of the fence arguing their point,
Yeah.
and they play off each other very well. We're still watching through this with the kids. I think we're in the middle of season 7 with the
Okay.
kids. So we're in the Daniel Jackson has ascended
Okay,
era
yep, yep.
of Stargate, but the kids, I don't think the kids realize he's coming back, and but they ask constantly if he's ever coming back.
How are they liking Jonas Quinn?
The kids actually really like Jonas.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, like when I was watching it, Jonas was always like, Jonas, and rewatching it, Jonas is a better character than I gave him credit for the first time around. But the first time when it happened, when we were watching it unfold, it was like, Jonas is fine, but why did you take Daniel away? Like,
Right, exactly. It's a kind of a phase of denial. It's almost like when somebody passes away and you've got all those phases. You're not ready to accept that new person. You're like, I still
right.
want Daniel Jackson.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, when I was first watching the series, because Daniel was my favorite character. So when he, ascended and the new guy was put in, Jonas, I was like, oh, he's okay, but he's not Daniel. But now looking back, I really enjoy Jonas,
Yeah, he adds an interesting perspective to the whole
Yeah.
thing. And you had to bring someone in to balance Jack, because Carter and Teal'c don't really balance him very well. They're also military minded
Yes.
Right.
and don't always
Carter's
balance him
kind
well.
of in the middle between Daniel and and
Yeah.
O'Neill,
Yeah.
but she's still military, and that's actually one thing that I liked about this show too, was that the drama was not this kind of Kardashian drama that we see in most TV shows these days, where it's like always pulling at the ridiculous heartstrings. They have a brilliant way of pulling at your heartstrings, but in a realistic way. Like the scenes where Carter and O'Neill are interested in each other, but they have duties, they have priorities and responsibilities, and that is a very real thing. I appreciate that about this show, that they didn't make it where every other episode they're having these animalistic desires towards one another that they constantly need to battle. Like, it's there, it's there, but you're not constantly having it thrown in your face. And I appreciate that also from the military standpoint, having grown up as a military brat. Like, your duty is to your job or your country or whatever. Like, I've seen that, and so you don't have. This show just had so many more real, for a sci-fi show, had so many realistic aspects that I think that's another thing that people could get on board with. You weren't getting this over dramatized, soap opera stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Like every cop show, the partners always fall in love, and I'm like, that's just not how the workplace works.
Right. Which is actually, as far as cop shows, there's Nathan Fillion's got one now in The Rookie, and while they've had some side characters that have had relationships, the main characters, they haven't done that, and I have appreciated that about that show.
That's nice. Yeah.
So
it's old after a while.
one of the things that I appreciate about Sam's character, she sets ground rules or demands that respect in the first episode. She has her famous speech that she gives to Jack, and Jack lets her know, well, I don't have a problem with you being a woman. It's the scientist I don't like. But once she does that, once she from that point on, she is respectful to Jack as her commanding officer. She's so much of media right now. They show that situation where, like, the subordinates constantly back talking their superiors, and that just isn't how it works
Exactly.
in the military.
Right.
So I really appreciated that. While she had her own opinions, compared to Daniel, who could talk back to Jack.
Right.
At the end of the day, she accepted orders.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It was really well done.
All
And
right.
didn't he earn an award? Anderson, didn't he get an award from the military for portraying the military in such a positive way? Didn't I read that? That he actually won an award from the Air Force?
He was, I don't know what, but there was something that he was awarded for his portrayal.
I think it's one of the best portrayals of military is Stargate SG-1, specifically Sam and O'Neill.
Yeah.
And I also like the part about Sam is that she is the scientist. She's the brains, which I think is really cool. She's the astrophysicist. She's the one that knows the in and outs of everything scientific.
Right, and she's this gorgeous woman, but they don't constantly put that in your face.
No,
right?
it's about her brains and her military.
Right.
Yeah,
Like we all know she's beautiful, and everybody knows she's beautiful, but that's not what we're focusing on. We just accept that she's beautiful.
Yeah.
Right. They're well-rounded people. And because they didn't fall into one of the other pitfalls. A lot of times when you've got one character that is really smart, the way you really show that off is by having the other characters appear dumb.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly.
And they never did that with this show. I mean, occasionally Jack plays dumb.
Yes.
Right.
Plays
That's just
it,
because he
yeah.
doesn't know what they're talking about. Yeah.
And I like, Jack is sometimes like Michael Scott, where somebody says something and it's like his response is kind of like, explain it to me like I'm 5.
Yeah.
But
Or it was my idea.
but the things that Jack is good at, he's very, very good at.
Yeah.
Right.
And so they didn't take that away to make other people look better.
Right. Strengths and weaknesses. Exactly.
And I think they also, a little bit for Sam of being too perfect. People thought, well, she's a brilliant scientist, but she's also a capable fighter and warrior, and she's doing it all. But then as the seasons went on, they didn't give her like a perfect love life either. They made it so that like that's the part of her life that she's sacrificing, the personal part.
Yeah.
Right.
Even when she tried to take on a daughter, Frasier was primarily being the mother, because she just couldn't balance, a personal life with all these other things she was accomplishing, and so that kind of, is realistic to somebody who's an
Right.
overachiever.
Right. Your
Yeah.
country comes first, basically. Her job came first.
So the big thing I wanted to get into tonight is kind of what's happening. I mean, Nick, you did get to watch the AI read, the script read the other day, right?
Yes.
Did anybody else get to watch that?
No,
I'm gonna let Nick tell us a little bit about it without totally spoiling it. It looked like a lot of fun. I've actually since gone and signed up for the companion app where it's at, but apparently, if you didn't catch it live, it doesn't appear to be on there at the moment. So
I can send you the link they even kind of hinted at us that we could share the link with people who didn't pay.
okay.
Because they wanted
Cool.
because it is a YouTube video. It is just a private YouTube video.
Okay.
So I'll get that to you.
Yeah, send me the link because I definitely tried to find it earlier and couldn't find it. But
I saw
yeah,
the news about it, but I didn't watch it yet.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll let Nick tell us a little bit about that and what to expect when we do get to see it.
So the first thing they talk, they have Brad Wright, they have the guy that created this AI, and the guy that runs the companion, just kind of talking round table like us, a couple of squares on, because it's all recorded like on Zoom. And they are talking about how they've had, for laughs and giggles in the past, like they've had AI make a Star Trek script or something like that, but they decided to make it more interesting. They made multiple AIs, so one for each character. And then they realized there was a little problem with that because Daniel Jackson talks to Carter differently than he does to Teal'c.
Right.
So they made bots specifically for each one. And so they had 4 characters. They had Keller, they had Rodney McKay, they had Carter, and they had Daniel Jackson.
Yeah, Jewel State was
And,
part of that too, right?
What's that?
Was Jewel State part of the table read, or was she just on the show?
No, she was part of the table read.
Okay.
So yeah, they did those, 2 Atlantis, 1 characters, and then they had a message before they started where Richard Dean Anderson came on, and I have to say that was probably the highlight for me because the last pictures or images or anything I've seen him with is Amanda Tapping would post stuff where she'd go see him, and I'm a big guy. He'd gotten bigger than me. And I guess he has a physical condition that makes it really hard for him to exert himself, some medical condition.
Okay.
And so he started gaining weight. He's back down, and he was joking with them. He's just kind of giving a message, and he says, so yeah, anyways, just don't mess it up for Brad Wright. Or I guess the AI or computer. And he's like, yeah, I haven't changed. And then he bye. He clicks off. And so when he just came on joking, and then they said Carter threw out the challenge to the AI guy that she wants to do another one, and she wants it to be her and Richard Dean Anderson have the AI create some relationship scenes for them. But
They're so good together, though.
Yeah.
They are.
What's funny is so the computer doesn't put together necessarily a coherent story, but sometimes it starts to sound like a coherent story because there's certain story beats that they hit so often, but it would just get it funny, and they would Carter would say something ridiculous, like the time dilation, this, that. McKay would just respond, "What?" and then someone would go, and then Daniel Jackson would be would come on, and then he'd start spouting something about Anubis or something, and then Carter would come back, and then Rodney would be, but the Wraith are on the moon. It would just jam out, like all of a sudden, like, so it would start out kind of coherent, and then like they get towards the end, and it would just like go into complete madness. And there was one point was really funny is that when Keller character and Daniel Jackson, who had no screen time, they did a script, because they did about 8 different scripts that the computer threw out, and they did a script of Daniel Jackson and Keller. Computer, for whatever reason, decided to make Keller flirt with Daniel Jackson, but Daniel Jackson to have nothing to do with it. And it was hilarious. And she's like, well, since we have all this time to kill, maybe we could get to know each other better. And Daniel Jackson was problem. I'd rather read a book. It was like, and that was how it ended. So there was a lot of hilarity, and it was like they would say it with a straight face, and the thing would end, and then they would go hilarious, and it was funny. They each got monologue, and you're thinking, Rodney McKay's monologue would be the longest, right? Because he spouted out, and so they get to him, and they made a joke that they would cut his off wherever they can put in "wait what," and so he says like one line of dialogue, "wait what," and his end, and everybody else gets like this 5-minute speech.
Wow. I'm excited to see that though, and it was kind of a big deal, and I think some of this was sort of a pitch by all these folks to look at Amazon and say, look, this is still relevant. Yeah. Like, people will still watch this stuff. And that's kind of where I want to go with this. Like, we know Amazon owns it now. Mm-hmm. So money's no longer the problem. Money is no longer the hurdle that has to be jumped over to have more Stargate. I want to hear from everybody what you would like to see Amazon do with the Stargate franchise. Like, do you want to see old characters come back? I mean, we know Brad Wright's been working on something.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily know what exactly. There's a lot of rumors about that, but there's some guesses that it would start off with the Atlantis and SG-1 crews rescuing the folks from Universe. You could go that route, or would you just like to see something totally brand new with some old faces coming back? We just go back to the SGC and...
I think I'd like to see something with some new characters, but kind of like maybe having a few of the old characters maybe as recurring, kind of like a whole new cast kind of thing. Right. And I actually would love to go back to the SGC again. Yeah. Like continuing, like maybe doing a whole new SG team, because we know there were Hub-teen SG teams. Right. Doing another team of some sort.
Well, what about Jack as the commander of the SGC?
That could work.
I kind of know a little bit of a spoiler on this, if you want to know. So this is also through the companion, though eventually it goes out to podcatchers. Okay. Brad Wright now has his own podcast.
Right.
And in that, he did one with Amanda Tapping, and he said that she would be in charge of the SGC.
Interesting.
Yeah, interesting.
Okay. And the SGC is no longer in Cheyenne Mountain, but on the moon.
Okay.
because they mentioned that in one of the movies.
They
And it
do.
was where they were going.
Yeah.
Is that now that they have ships, they built one on the moon so that they wouldn't be endangering the Earth as much.
Do they mention that in the Arc of Truth, or
I
I
can't
think it's
remember
in
where it
Continuum.
is it in Continuum? Okay.
They just make a comment about it.
It's a really offhanded comment.
Uh-huh.
They moved Atlantis out of the San Francisco Bay onto the moon, and they were building basically a moon base there.
Right.
And from what he's kind of divulged is that basically back in 2019 he was commissioned to come up with a 3-episode pilot script to pitch to Netflix. And Netflix got the right to broadcast Stargate SG-1 as kind of a test to see if there was interest. And so he went on social media and said, not saying at the time, not saying anything, but go watch Stargate on Netflix. And then just as that was kind of coming in to maybe fruition, then we had the pandemic, and then threw all that kind of on hold.
Yeah.
So, but he's got a 3-episode script.
Okay.
Interesting.
And to me, I look at what I want to see. I definitely want to see characters return. I would like them. I think being realistic as a fan, you want to see, like, let's see what happens to Atlantis. Like, how do they take care of the race? How do they?
Yeah.
But realistically, they're not going to get that whole crew of actors together. Not on a continuous show. They've all gone off. They've all committed to other things.
Also, with Jason Momoa having such a big career now, I don't see him coming back either.
No,
So-
you could probably get him to come back. I mean, I think Jason Momoa is up for just about anything. I certainly think he would come back and do a guest cameo. And I say he's up for anything. I've seen the guy walk around at conventions, and he just walks around on the convention floor like he could care less about
He's a fun-loving
anybody.
guy.
He is like we
down to earth.
met him. We got a chance to meet him in New Orleans at Comic-Con there, and he was just out on the convention floor having a good time, and just there was a mob following him around, and he just ignored them and just walked
Living
around and
his
did his
best
own
life.
thing. And yeah,
Well, you look at what he's doing for Apple TV with Steve.
right.
Yeah.
And he's actually a producer, I believe, on that. And another Red Fivers, the Salty Nerd podcast, has interviewed a couple of the members of that, and they were talking to the director, and he mentioned that Jason Momoa is very involved in that, and that while he'd never seen any Stargate, it was Jason Momoa that he didn't know it, but Jason Momoa was getting all his Atlantis buddies on the show. And that's
Okay, because
why,
I haven't seen the show, but I've seen shots of a lot of Stargate Atlantis folks on the show, so that makes sense.
'cause
Yeah.
he's, except for Taylor, he's got his whole crew going.
So
Okay.
maybe Jason Momoa would be interested in coming
I
back
don't-
for
I don't-
something.
I don't think Momoa would come back as a full-time cast member,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but I absolutely think Jason Momoa would love to come back and do a
Especially
spot
if
here and
Amazon
there.
mo-
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
look at what Amazon is, spending on some of their other shows with the, I don't know why, Andrew, you'll know what
Well,
I'm
I mean,
talking about. Like the big,
Well, they're doing the Lord of the Rings series, and I mean,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
going to be far and away the most expensive TV show ever made. I mean, they're looking. The first season alone will be the most expensive season of a TV show ever made, and it's like 3 or 4 times what the most expensive season of Game of Thrones was.
Wow.
and
They
I
better
think
get it right then.
Exactly.
They better get it right.
whether you like it or not, there is a lot of money being put into the Star Trek shows. You look
Yeah.
at something like Foundation. Right now, The Mandalorian. I don't see Amazon isn't going to, like, Stargate's not going to come back and be like the budget of the Orville. Maybe if it was
Right.
on Netflix, But if
Yeah.
it's going to be on Amazon Prime as an original and Amazon's flipping the bill, they're going to make it breathtaking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think you're going to see really, really good things if they do bring it back. As far as the money that's put into it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to see old cast return, and I just really hope that they've. I hope that when it comes time to make a series, because I don't think there's any doubt at this point that something's going to happen now that Amazon owns it. Amazon
Yeah.
has got to get their money back. I mean, they spent a lot of money for MGM. They're going to want to recap that money. Stargate is one of the biggest TV franchises that MGM had. They're going to want to capitalize on that. So I think you're definitely getting it. But it's when it gets time, is Amazon going to listen to people like Brad Wright when they say, look at what happened with Universe,
Yeah.
and let's not do that again. Like,
I mean,
let's.
Right.
Do you think Amazon? I kind of think they might follow the Brad Wright idea because, and this is why, because Universe was a flop, and they don't want to lose that money.
Yeah.
So
And the
with
thing
putting-
is, like, if you're going to listen to anybody on Stargate, it should be Brad Wright.
yeah,
And I would hope to see Peter DeLuise come back on.
Oh, yeah, Peter, yeah.
Some as well.
It's hard to Hard to say.
It's interesting because. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, just saying it's hard to tell. It's just one of those things that I think a lot of us are afraid of anymore with taking our beloved stories, our beloved fictions,
Right.
yeah,
and making something brand new. The way cinema is going these days, a lot of distrust. And I have gotten to that point where I'd rather just kind of stick with the old stuff and just leave it alone. Like as much as
Yeah.
I would love to see the cinematography and everything that they would bring to a show like Stargate, as much as it's in my heart, bigger part of me is just like, let's just leave it alone.
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh, and that is, I mean, that's a very reasonable way to feel about it. And honestly, if it were just SG1 and Atlantis, I would probably feel about the same way about it. But I kind of feel like we already had our major hiccup
Yeah,
in
exactly.
Universe, and maybe they learned enough from that to back away from it.
Yeah. We just seem
Well,
to be running out
so-
of fresh ideas. And so it's almost like they're just going to maybe rehash maybe the old stuff. It's like, we
Right,
had
'cause that's-
something beautiful. Why not make something new? Not
Right.
necessarily Stargate, but let's take all that energy and make something brand new. I think we all have heard the same stories over and over again,
yeah,
where it's like
Yeah.
they're just remakes of everything. So,
yeah,
you know.
Yeah, it's everything lately is either a full reboot or a soft reboot, or I don't want
Gender
something that
swaps,
yeah, I don't want something that ignores everything that came before it. You know, that's something
Exactly,
we've been
yeah.
talking about a lot on the show lately, is this current desire from parts of the fandom to just ignore everything that came before. It's, getting mad about fan service is kind of the buzzword. And I agree, fan service can be done right or wrong.
Right.
yeah.
But
So-
there's some people that scream anytime any fan service is done because they just want something brand new that doesn't hinge on what came before. And there's a lot of talk about this with like the new Ghostbusters. Some people were that way with the Star Wars sequel movies, where they just wanted to throw away everything that came before and do something brand new. And it's like, but you can't do that and call it the Skywalker saga.
No, you can't.
Right.
Yeah,
A little hard there.
yeah.
Right. What were you going to say, Nick?
Just a couple little thoughts here. One, like Joe Malazzi, who is Brad Wright's, right-hand man on the show, he
Right.
recently was talking about Universe, and he said that a big part of that was that, they had been doing 15 seasons of Stargate, and they wanted to do something new. But
Yeah.
they've had a break now.
Yeah.
They've had a break now, and so they were tapped out, and so now they could come back and do something, I think, a lot more fresh. But at the same time, the thing that concerns me is if Amazon's going to put that money into it, do they look at people like Brad Wright, like Joe Malazzi, these different ones? Oh, those are the cheap sci-fi TV guys. Are they going to look at it, even though we are the fans, and I think that's why we have to be vocal. we have to be, tagging. There's a 365 Stargate campaign going on right now on Twitter and Facebook, where every day you post a post about Stargate and you put that tag in it and tag Amazon, so that you let them know that you want Brad Wright Stargate back, because I could see if they're going to put that kind of money behind it, that they're going to want to get somebody young and fresh and that deals in that kind of level. Whereas
Right.
everything Brad Wright has done before and after Stargate has always kind of sat in the Stargate budget.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
And
going to be.
I think he could do it, but does Amazon?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. Like, the money and things like that are not an obstacle here. Like, they can get whoever they want when it comes time to make Stargate. But the thing is, like, right now, I mean, like I said, if you go look at Stargate, like, Brad Wright is Stargate. Like, this doesn't work if you don't at least have him on board.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but I mean, yes, with anything like this, it's certainly reasonable to be a little gun shy at this point when you're talking about beloved series, and you could look at a lot of different things, including Star Trek, which have just gone totally off the rails.
Yeah, like Discovery, that's gone
Right.
a completely different direction.
And I wanted to like it so bad.
So did I, yeah.
And it just, the more I watched, the more I was like, this is not Star Trek. I don't know what this is. And
it
to
just-
me, it's, well,
It doesn't have the Star Trek feel.
it doesn't. But, Star Trek, the thing about Star Trek was it wasn't just, to Gene Roddenberry, Star Trek was his vision of the future for humanity.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't just like, this is a version. This was his dream, his hope for the future of humanity.
Yeah.
And
In
Star
some
Trek
ways, he
does,
got his wish. Flip phones, all that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
But Discovery has been such a big departure from
It's a
From
big
the things-
departure from his vision of what
it is.
humanity will become. Yeah.
Well, and it's why I don't like the animated series, the new animated series that's out, the Lower Decks.
Yeah.
It's like,
It's still closer than Discovery.
it is,
is,
which
yeah.
is weird, but it's they say you should never become a caricature of yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what Lower Decks is. It's a caricature of of Star Trek.
I look at it and I look at something like Discovery and I go, if it was called something else and it came out as a new show, I might like it. But when you try to tell me this
Yeah.
is Star Trek, that this is part of this universe, that's when, as a fan, like, it just becomes this insurmountable wall
Yeah.
Right.
liking the show.
And that's the fear
And-
that's the fear I think with Stargate is, this idea that they could pull a Discovery on us,
Yeah.
For sure.
Reimagine
But I think
it.
if Brad Wright's involved, he's going to respect the characters.
Yeah.
He might do something with the show that we don't like. It's like we say, if George Lucas had done the sequel trilogy, we still might not have liked it.
Right.
But we know he wouldn't have done with Luke what was done in the sequel. It would have just been different. He would have respected the characters that he had more.
Right.
And I think that's true of Brad Wright. Like, he might go a direction that we're like, man, I really didn't like that Stargate went that direction. But all those legacy characters are going to be treated with respect.
Yeah. And I think that's the main thing. I think you've got to have the right people in charge. You've got to tell good stories. I mean, we harp on this a lot. You can do a lot of things wrong when you make a TV show or a movie, but you still have to tell a good story.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And the story is the core of it all. You can have terrible effects, have cheesy effects and things like that, and still tell really good stories.
Now, this is something I have a question. Who do you think would be the villain of this new Stargate show? I mean, if we were to follow the timeline and actually say this is further in the future, like, because we've had, the Gaul, the Ori, Wraith, replicators.
Right. Yeah, I don't know, because you mostly solved them all mostly. Except, I mean, I guess the Wraith are still technically.
But that's what I mean. Like, I'm wondering if they would go with like a whole new villain, or would you bring the Gaul back, or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. What do y'all think, Tabitha?
I've thought about that just because I've read fan fictions and things like that. And two different ideas. One could be kind of like going like ancient in our world. You know how we have, we're talking about the mythology and they take from it. They could, I would think, something kind of earth related like vampires, not quite as like ours, but something. I know that the Wraith are kind of similar in that way, but I always thought it'd be kind of interesting if they would have taken that to an extreme level. It's something old world, old school, but just kind of maybe revamp it a little bit nicer than, if you will, than the Wraith, so it's not quite as alien. What if it's a little bit more basic? Like, we get, like I said, we get all our mythology and stuff like that.
I think they left themselves open something that they've always kind of hinted at, which was the Furlings. And
The
we never got to
The
see them.
Furlings, yeah.
If we finally got them, and maybe why haven't they been in the picture? Well, maybe like the Asgard, they've got a greater enemy they've been fighting.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah.
And you bring something new, because that's kind of like the Stargate's reoccurring problem is they poke a hornet's nest before they really know what they're doing, and then they bring that problem home.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Could do that, or it could be instead of too much of a villain versus the protagonist. I was wondering if it would be more of a situation, a circumstance thing. Like, there's always that room for the alternative universes, because we've seen that in SG-1 where they have the alternate realities. Yeah. And I want, what would happen if the alternate realities collided, and that there was this one, if you will, area within the power of the Stargate or something like that, where you have certain characters that were brought from, and they could be brand new characters. I think it'd be interesting to kind of bring back Dr. Frasier, or Tara Rothery for Dr. Frasier, but she'd be a different kind of doctor. Maybe she'd be like a psychologist or something, and she and some other people are kind of stuck in this alternate reality, and every now and then these people from other realities that still associate with the Stargate program kind of jump in there, and this thing might implode and impact the different universes as we know it. I don't know, just something kind of, I thought about that for a while. It's different.
That's interesting, because there's a lot of episode plots about alternate universes in Stargate SG-1. So that would be a really good idea.
Instead of having an actual villain, of course, you will always have to have, good versus evil. But what if it was more problematic rather than bad guys and good guys?
Right.
Just something.
We also,
and that way, you don't necessarily have to bring in your key characters that we all know, we all love, because that's kind of hard to do, and I bring it, because that's always the thing when you make new TV shows off of old ones. You always want the original people to come back, but what if they were just kind of mentioned, or you bring back the side characters, like Dr. Frasier. She's one of my favorite characters, but I know she was has pretty good sized fan base. What if she was there instead of O'Neill or Daniel Jackson, and maybe some other people that we were fond of, and they're the ones that have the problems, rather than always bringing back the core people, just for something different.
I also think there's some bad guys that could come back. So you always have the possibility that some minor Goa'uld could rise to power, and you could do a spin on it. You could do a Goa'uld in an Asgard body, or you also have the Ori. We're kind of told that they're defeated, but we don't 100% know that they're defeated, because we don't get to see after the movie. We just have the movie that kind of states we've won, but how many times have they thought they won? I mean, how many times did they kill Apophis? And he came back, right. And they took some of their power away by making their believers not believe them anymore. But that doesn't, there's still a possibility that they could come back, or Anubis.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was locked in a forever battle that was keeping him occupied, but what if he eventually wins that battle? Anubis could come back as a bad guy. And the replicators, you could always have a scientist try to bring him back.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a lot of play there, that with the established stuff, plus you have those kind of evil Asgard that we had in the Pegasus Galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
That was originally they was going to be part of what they were going to go with Stargate Atlantis going forward, and then that got cut short.
Yeah. There's any number of options for a villain, and it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do there.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's still plenty of new Goa'uld you could explore.
Exactly.
You know, there's plenty of names to rip out of mythology for that. So
Right.
it'll be interesting, but I'm gonna have to wrap us up here because I've got 2 more episodes to go record of the podcast. So thanks, Alan and R2 the Icky that joined us here a little late. But thanks for joining, and Christian Fandom Geek, if you're still there, thanks for joining. But most of all, thank you guys for joining, and I hope that sometime soon we can all get back together and talk about a new impending Stargate series. I mean,
That would be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been fun. Nice meeting you all.
yeah, it was nice
nice
to
meeting
meet you, and thanks for coming on. Nick, thanks as always for coming on, and Amanda. Before we go, let me run around the table real quick, and everybody, Tabitha, where can people find you and your stuff online?
Well, I have my own YouTube channel. I'm simply Dreaming Tabitha. I do a lot of artistic stuff, primarily nerd things or just whatever I want to. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. Dreaming Tabitha. I'm pretty consistent. I don't get fancy with my stuff, so you can just find me. Keep it real simple.
All right, and Amanda?
Yeah, you can find me at Galaxy Queers Podcast. It's at Galaxy Queers on Twitter and at Galaxy Queers Podcast on YouTube, where we talk about all kinds of nerdy stuff. And you can follow me also on my Twitter, my personal Twitter, at Jedi Caligula 89.
Awesome. And Nick?
Yeah, I'm on YouTube as Backyard TARDIS, and then you can find me under my name on Discord, Nicholas Schaefer, or on Twitter. I believe they shortened it to Back TARDIS, but pretty much Backyard TARDIS all across the board now. So I've been kind of trying to make that standardized.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for joining me. Thanks again. I see we finally have people popping into the chat as we're wrapping up here. And someone else's, Ro or someone else must have just wrapped up. Now everybody's popping in over here.
Must have just finished, I think.
Okay. But thanks for joining, and I hope you'll check out the show if you weren't here for the whole thing. But you can find me running the Twitter account here at _Fictionary, and of course you can check out the Science Fictionary podcast and Coruscant Radio Underground wherever you listen to podcasts. And as always, please go check out red5network.com and at Red5 Network on Twitter for all of the rest of the Red 5 podcast family. And that's going to do it. So good night, everybody.
Nice.
This podcast is part of the Red 5 Network. For more Red 5 Network podcasts, visit red5network.com.